We'll start with chapter 6 and then move to chapter 5. And the reason we do it kind of around the corner is because in order to understand Hobbes, you need to understand egoism and self-interest. Thomas Hobbes, which we'll devote our study to in chapter 5, is probably, he's not the smartest person who ever lived, but if you look at our traditions here in the United States coming out of English tradition, so his influence on English tradition is huge. I don't think he was a very smart person, but he came up with one great idea, and sometimes those people have more effect on society than the geniuses. So let's start with chapter 6. By the way, chapter 6, then chapter 5, and if you could please have that finished by this Friday, which would be April the 2nd. And when you do that, please go on to chapter 7, utilitarianism, because psychological egoism principally is the crucial aspect of American political and ethical systems through its influence on Thomas Hobbes, or Thomas Hobbes' influence on it, and then again Hobbes' influence on utilitarianism, which became the predominant theme expressed in American political thought. So we have to understand egoism before we understand Hobbes. We have to understand Hobbes before we understand utilitarianism. So 6 and 5 by Friday, and then start chapter 7. By the way, I'm making slow progress on your papers. I've got about 60 papers, so it's going to take me a little while to devote the time needed to those. By the way, the ones I've looked at are superb, so I don't think anyone has a whole lot to worry about, but we'll talk about that later. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn to chapter 6 first in the textbook. Pull the textbook up or make notes to yourself. I'm just going to go through chapter 6, and then I'm going to go through chapter 5. And then later on today, this evening sometime, probably I'm going to send out this video that we're doing right now. And then I'm going to ask you to look at a video that I did earlier that's on the YouTube channel. It's entitled Lecture on Chapter 6, and it is from October the 12th, 2020. So nothing has changed in my thought since that point, at least. So I'm going to refer you to that video. So that is on the YouTube channel. Lecture on Chapter 6 is the name of it, and the date is 10/12/20. So again, I'll send all of that out via Blackboard later on. So let's go to the chapter. It's entitled Egoism, Self-Interest, and Altruism. And as we suggested, egoism and self-interest are the underlying aspects of the social contract, which is the underlying aspect of utilitarianism and foundational for understanding British and American economics and jurisprudence. So as you go into the chapter, the major heading, first major heading is psychological egoism. He divides the discussion between psychological egoism and ethical egoism. So you should keep that in mind. Please dig into the psychological egoism part of this. Going on through the chapter, he has the paradox of hedonism. Make sure you know what hedonism is and what the paradox of hedonism is. Then he talks about the argument from self-deception. And then he goes to the second characteristic of egoism, ethical egoism, again, psychological egoism and ethical egoism. That's where he begins to discuss Hobbes' argument from predominant psychological egoism. Make sure you pay particular attention to that. Then he discusses Smith's economic argument. Adam Smith, I hope that most of you have heard of Adam Smith. He's the laissez-faire economist. The origin of the laissez-faire arguments for capitalism. And when I say laissez-faire capitalism, again, psychological and predominant egoism are very influential in capitalist thinking. Then he discusses Ayn Rand's argument for the virtue of selfishness. I don't know if any of you have read Ayn Rand's work. She's becoming, I would say, much more influential in American thought than she ever has been. I guess if you've been listening to politics, you certainly know about Ron Paul, who is a libertarian politician, and his son Rand Paul, who I think is a senator from Kentucky. Rand Paul is named for Ayn Rand, so you might hopefully thereby understand the influence of Ayn Rand on contemporary politics. She in many ways formulated the whole idea of libertarianism. Let's see, I guess the best place to go to read kind of the essence of what she stands for is John Galt's speech in her novel entitled Atlas Shrugged. That's where she establishes psychological objectivism. So if you want to read that at some point, that would be good. I think it's I don't know, several pages, 6-7 pages of John Galt's speech there in Atlas Shrugged, the novel. I will say at this point, some people have argued that Aristotle's ethics are based upon egoism, especially in the Nicomachean Ethics. Ayn Rand claims that, but that is patently untrue, because there's nothing what we would call egoistic about Aristotle, especially in the Nicomachean Ethics. By doing what is noble in the Nicomachean Ethics, one benefits both him or herself and others. So Aristotle would argue that my flourishing requires the flourishing of others. If that's any kind of egoism, I would call that a balanced egoism. The egoism of Rand and most traditional egoists simply focus in on me, myself, and mine, rather than how that would affect another person. That's what's happening in Aristotle is completely different than the egoism that underlays Hobbes, capitalism, and Ayn Rand. So that's just a little word to the wise there. Then on further in the chapter, we come across his heading, Arguments Against Ethical Egoism. And for normally, when I ask a question about this, I'll ask you to think uh, after you've read this about which of these objections, or which two objections maybe, are the best of the objections, and ask you to explain that. So make sure you understand the arguments against ethical egoism. That's the inconsistent outcomes argument, the publicity argument, the friendship and paradox argument, the argument from counterintuitive consequences, and then the problem for future generations. So that's chapter 5. That's it. Those are the things that you need to concentrate on and consider. Now I'm going to quickly go over chapter 5 and then ask you to look at that October the 12th, 2020 lecture on the YouTube channel to fill in the gaps here on Hobbes. I was going to do a lecture on Hobbes later on in the week, but as I looked over that former lecture, it was good. I thought it was good, and I fear I would leave something out. So I'm just going to ask you to look at that old video. So let's look at chapter 5, the social contract theory and the motive to be moral. Make sure you understand the definition of social contract theory, which is right on the first couple of pages there in the textbook. Then there's a major heading, why does society need moral rules? Make sure you understand what Hobbes' state of nature is. Now, Professor Poeman brings to bear the old novel, The Lord of the Flies. Here is an example of Hobbesian state of nature. Now, the assumption in The Lord of the Flies is that you have children who supposedly are pure and innocent. And William Golding, the author of The Lord of the Flies, places these children on an abandoned island, and all hell breaks loose. So the point is that it's built in to human character. It's not, none of us are innocent. And because, almost might even say original sin is so rampant, there has to be checks and balances on human behavior. So we all need rules with which to govern ourselves so that we do not end up killing each other in our sleep. And for Hobbes, this is important even for wealthy and rich and powerful people, because the assassin can always get you, inside your bedroom window. So no one is safe. That's the reason we all have to have these agreements where we check our own egos, so to speak. I usually tell an old joke that I heard years ago about a little guy sitting on the corner of a bar, and this big guy comes in and just drags him off the bar stool and just beats him senseless. And he says, "Jiu-jitsu from Japan." And so the little guy recovers, and the next week or so he's at the bar again, and the same big guy comes in, drags him off the bar, and just beats him senseless again, and says, "Karate from Korea," or wherever. And so some weeks after that, the big guy, the powerful guy, is sitting at the bar where the little guy usually sits, and the little guy comes in and just lays him flat with a crowbar. And the little guy says, "Crowbar from Sears." So all of us are equal. We can all be harmed and killed, even in our privacy, even in the sanctity of our own homes. So according to Hobbes, we all must give over a little bit of our ego in order to assure our own personal safety. The question for Hobbes is how much of those natural rights do you give up before tyranny comes at you from the other end? So look at the next major heading after the Hobbesian morality of the Lord of the Flies. Look at the heading which is social order and the benefits of morality. The basic benefits of morality, the agreements that we implicitly make with each other. By the way, these are all implicit agreements. We sort of sign on the dotted line, we sign our signature that we're going to abide by these rules and regulations by our participation in the society itself. So as we hold businesses, raise families, go to school, and do all of these aspects of society that make a society what it is, we give over our implicit assent to these checks and balances on our own egos. So that is your personal signature on the dotted line of society. Then Dr. Poeman asked, in connection to all of this, why should I be moral? Basically, the answer to why I should be moral is that if I'm not, then I suffer. It will be the war of all against all. And the most famous quote from Hobbes is, in this state of nature, if we don't check, if we don't have these checks and balances, if we do not have morality, then our individual lives become poor, nasty, brutish, and short. So without morality, without this implicit agreement to abide by moral terms, our lives are worthless, brutish, short, and inhuman. Now, morality, self-interest, and game theory. Now, under normal circumstances here, I ask people to, I send out a game that I ask you to play through. I'm not going to do that this time, maybe to the detriment of the class, I don't know. You can check out the iterated, ITTERATED, the iterated Prisoner's Dilemma if you want to. That's an internet game. Again, in some classes, I make assignment to play through those possibilities. I'm not going to do that, but I do want you to read Dr. Poeman's section here on game theory and the prisoner's dilemma. The last part of the chapter, the last 2 or 3 sections, are entitled The Motive to Always Be Moral, including the paradox of morality and advantage, the modified principle of rational self-interest. You should pay attention to that to the extent that I may ask you to define that or define those things on a quiz. So that's it. That's simply our short read through these 2 chapters, kind of highlighting what you probably should pay attention to. Again, I'm going to send out a more complete lecture on Hobbes in particular, because that's our major interest here in these 2 chapters is Thomas Hobbes. All of the rest of this is just an excuse to get to Hobbes. So I'm going to send out, I'll send out the video of what we're doing now, and then I'll link a video, a link to this October 12th video when I send this one out. So you folks who are present here know that you should read both. Hopefully people who listen in later to this recorded video will also get the same message to pay attention to what they should be paying attention to. So now I'm going to open it up. If you have any questions at all about these two chapters or anything else for that matter, then shoot. Let me know. Give me what you got. No questions. Wow. That must be either good or bad. Don't know which. You never know unless you get questions. Okay. If das ist alles, then das ist alles. Okay, no questions. Well, I'll be in touch via YouTube, via Blackboard through YouTube later on. So everybody take care. And of course, you know, if you have any questions, all you have to do, shoot me an email.
Have a good evening.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.